and Kyle for making it all tick, and Cal for getting the word out there. It's a great team. So we'll start with Roger. We'll be talking about software development and its challenges, and then David, and then Andrea, and then Stephen. Roughly how this is going to go is each presenter will have 10 minutes to speak, and then 7 minutes of a Q&A. To keep things going, it would be great if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll read them out to the presenter during the Q&A. If we have more time at the end, we can definitely go back and do a more open Q&A. Just testing this system out to see how it goes for future collaborative conversations. So I will be starting a timer, and then I'll be the bad cop and nudge in at the 10-minute mark. If the speaker wants to use a few minutes of their Q&A time to keep presenting, that's fine, but we'll try to move on to the next person at the 17-minute mark. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? No. Oh, it was great. When we switched, I saw all your faces. Okay, Roger, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. Let me go ahead and share my screen and get things set up over here.
Okay. Is this anyone's first UX NHPA meeting, just as we're setting up? Just always curious.
Yeah, kind of. I went to
well,
one,
welcome.
so I guess it's my second.
Welcome. Way to make an impression on your second meeting. Joshua, thanks for joining us. All right, thank you, Roger.
Okay, thank you. All right. So thank you, everybody, for having me speak tonight. So my name's Roger Soucy, former board member for UXPA. Who am I? Well, for the past 15 years, I've designed products for many different sectors, including consumer electronics, life sciences, consumer health, medical, aviation, SaaS, enterprise software, a whole breadth of stuff. Now, the first 6 years of that were overlapping my UX and my product manager title, but I gravitated to the UX work so much so that I just decided to just jump over completely in 2012, and I've never looked back. And my product management skills have been a total asset to me as a UX designer, working with cross-discipline teams, cross-functional teams. And so it's been definitely an asset to have. And so some of the things that my experience has taught me, I've worked with many different software development teams over the years, in-house, offshore, consultancies, you name it. And I've taken something away from each one of those experiences. So I'd like to cover some of those things. And, this is a 10-minute talk, so I'm not going to get too deep in stuff. But these things are going to be focused on reducing the strain that commonly occurs between software development and design. And if we incorporate some of the development-centered thinking into your design process, it really can straighten the curve along the product roadmap for you in the project. So one of the first things I found that's important to deal with is culture, right? Based on where you are, or even like a subculture within the company. How is design viewed in that? Where does design fit in the culture? Is it the necessary obstacle for development in order to get their work done? Or is it something that's truly desired and valued and gets the room it needs to breathe, to ideate, iterate, and fully define? Now, if it's a necessary obstacle, I feel, I've been there, I know what it's like. It's not going to be given the attention, the time, or the support that it needs unless you really call out what the increased risk to cost and schedule and failure can be. So you really got to be the voice for it. And that can be hard sometimes, but it's super, super important. Product requirements. This is something that I guess I'm just a real stickler about. Being a former product manager, I wrote lots and lots, thousands and thousands of pages of requirements, and it's important. These are the things that define the features, functionality, and other specific criteria that success is going to be based on, and it's essential. So, how are you going to design a solution, let alone an effective solution, in a timely manner if you don't have this information? I mean, you here's an example. I'll cut into some short stories here. One project that I worked on was a dual channel infusion pump, and they were a leader in the market. They had this infusion pump for giving IV therapy that's been out on the market and, big market share. And they wanted to come out with a new one that was just like the current one. These are the requirements, by the way, just like our current one, but 2 of them in the same box, but with a touchscreen. It should be easy because we've got all those requirements for the existing product. So anyways, it's not easy. It's huge. And, who ends up writing those requirements? The designer does. And who challenges your requirements? Everyone. So get those requirements as best you can. Now, product requirements can evolve organically. It can work, but there really needs to be a cohesive team that has representatives from each of the different disciplines that are all equally valued and respected. And this is really what an agile environment is. And it works great when it's implemented properly. But you still need some overarching knowledge, at the beginning, so that you just don't paint yourself into a corner with design models that aren't scalable or flexible, and that can't be reused or reinforced throughout your design. You want predictability, from a user experience perspective. And the developers really value reuse and scalability. So those are things that you really want to coalesce on and align with the development team on, and requirements are going to be part of that. Workload dependencies. This is really important too, because you can't do your work if you don't have certain things, and other people can't do their work unless they have things from you. And even in an agile environment, there is still this sort of lockstep waterfall type of a workflow that happens. And so the workload dependencies need to be understood by everyone in the project. In the design team needs sufficient visibility of what to work on next in order to support the development team. You want to make sure you have your stuff ready for them when they're ready to work on it. And so having a definition of what it is that you need to do is important, but knowing when you need to do it is equally important. And so without that, there's going to be all kinds of bottlenecks. Your time estimates will be way off. I mean, they're going to be wrong in general, right? But they're going to be way off. And if leadership can't count on time estimates from anyone, heads are going to roll. And developers don't want to be in the crosshairs any more than you do. So it works to your mutual advantage, to the whole company's advantage, to be aligned and really clarify what the workload dependencies are on a task basis. An example for that was this project where all of the visual design assets that I had created and were using in the design needed custom names, right? I was just generating numeric values for the asset names. And the development team already had an established naming convention that I was unaware of, along with a repository that had a specific directory structure for how those assets were organized. And that was completely different than how it was created in the wireframe, different layers on the interface and how things were called out. And so, I had to do all this rework of the naming for the UI elements in both the wireframes and on the visual design assets, not just a second time, but actually a third time, because the dependency and the clarification wasn't defined up front. So a lot of extra work. Tools and frameworks, I'm going to bundle these together. I know they're different, they're explicitly different, but they're both fundamental cornerstones for any given contributor's output. And everyone's got their favorites. As a UX designer, I love Axure. I've used other tools, but Axure is just my go-to. And it's a good idea to understand what tools or frameworks the developers are using too, and what their constraints are, so that you don't design something that they can't implement easily. And for an example, I designed a scrolling drop list that contains sticky elements in the list above a separator. That wasn't something that they could do in Angular Bootstrap. And I didn't know that until later, right? If I knew that up front, then yeah, so something learned there. So take the time. Developers are going to resent you if you start to present things that increase effort or risk. So try and avoid that. And review the tools that each of you are going to use with one another, so that you can understand the constraints or limitations that they may have. as well as some of the benefits and assets, because as you use a couple of widgets or interaction models as examples to go through the tools, it's going to reveal both areas of concern and opportunities, and it's going to allow you to avoid problems before they begin. The other thing is motivation, right? What are people's motivations? That really is going to drive how they perform and how they approach things. So designers want the developers to implement the design as they created it, and the motivation behind that design really should be about finding a balance between a good user experience, development cost, and time to market, and supporting the product vision as a whole. And developers typically are motivated by schedule and simplicity, low bug counts, scalability. And that means anything that's unforeseen in your design regarding the elements and their behavior, or any customizations or one-offs, it's going to put their schedule at risk. And your design is really going to lose out in the end, because getting the product to market on time is going to depend on the development team keeping to their schedule. And anything you do to impact the risk of that schedule is going to be a problem. And development's going to work with you to try and come up with a solution that's easier for them. And as long as it's meeting your requirements for satisfying functional requirements and user experience, then it's a win, even though it's something different than what you envisioned. So constraints, if there isn't a clear understanding of what the constraints are for the project and for the team, it's going to be easy to overstep those boundaries and leave your sandbox that you're supposed to stay working in. So you need to know what those constraints are, and having constraints actually improves your creative output. Personally, I do better with that. It's just like how a persona is going to sort of keep you focused on what the user's needs are. Having those constraints set up on other aspects of the design is going to be a benefit. This is a big one. We talk about artifacts. Who's your audience? Who's consuming it, and how is the artifact going to be used? It needs to be consumable by your target audience with little to no effort. So things like, what's the fidelity? What's the format? How do people have access to these artifacts? Is this an independent artifact, or is it incorporated with something else? Like, is your wireframe going to fuel development team's backlog story definition? How is that going to get incorporated into that? Is it going to be easier, or is it going to be hard? Work with them to try and streamline things. And that's concepts, annotated wireframes, your visual design assets if you're doing that, prototypes, all of that.
That's about our 10 minutes, Roger. Do you want to take another minute?
Yep, this is the last slide.
Okay, perfect timing.
So you have to really have a working knowledge of what the process is, and be aware of what it is and how others are working and what their processes are. Because if you're going to work in harmony with them, you need to understand what their process is, and you take time, ask questions, and better yet, if you can inject design into their process, like getting the development team's backlog to include UX stories, all the better. And that's really, again, that's like an agile environment, and in that you should really be part of the backlog and not just living off on your separate island by yourself. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'd like to open up for questions. I want to thank everybody for the time, and I'd love to talk more about that if you have any interest.
Excellent. Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome.
And if anyone has any questions, you can write them in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, you can do that as well, if that's easier. As we wait for some to come in. Roger, is there a way that you found best to advocate for design in this process?
It really does depend on the culture. Sometimes and commonly, I've been like a UX army of one. Other times I've been part of a team. And even still within the team, like you're working on a particular division of products. And so you may have like this overarching UX team, but you're the guy who does the aviation stuff, for example. Being the champion for that and getting visibility to that, I think is really easy when you become a vested party in the project beyond your sandbox. When you take an interest in what the developers are doing and what works well for them, they're gonna be like, hey, this, this guy actually cares, he's committed to this beyond just his thing. And so you get what you give, basically. So if you give respect and you provide interest and insight and making things easier for other people, they're going to turn around and do the same thing for you, and they'll respect the benefits, because ultimately you create that mutual respect where I'm helping you, you're helping me, and we're coming out looking great in the end.
Mm-hmm. Great. I saw some nodding heads, so I think there's some definite agreement in the group. And Boyd, hi Boyd, had a good question. Is there a specific way you prefer to manage artifacts?
It really depends on the company, even the division or team within the company. As far as like wireframes, I'll generate Word documents and send those out. There's also electronic versions that I'll keep on a cloud-based repository that people have access to. That whole thing. Sometimes I end up being the visual designer as well, and that whole little snippet I was talking about with the custom naming, that's actually still ongoing right now. So it's still a fresh wound. And, I'm going to have to rename all of these assets with custom names that still need to be defined by the dev team for me. So in order for me to give them what they need to give me something, and then I need to do my work for them. So it really does all depend. The key thing is to stay organized, having access to that so that people don't have to dig and 20 layers deep into a server on the company directory. Set up a workspace, set up your own process, create your own environment, and invite people to it, or understand what their process, their environment, and how they manage their artifacts, and incorporate yourself into that. So it's either, create your own island and welcome one, welcome all, or become a visitor and go and visit everybody else. So it really depends on what works best.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Daniela has a question. Do you share initial wireframes with the developers?
Yeah, I do. I like to get developers involved even at the concept phase. So in an ideal environment, I'm part of a Scrum team that has developers on it, a product owner, and the product manager's in there too. And we start going through and backlog grooming, and we start creating these stories, and UX is in there. And part of that is concepts and ideation. And so you come up with a quick concept and you pass it, you throw it over the wall to the developers and say, what do you think about this? And I don't do that for everything. It's when there's something that's somewhat unique or a little bit of a problem you're trying to solve. And they'll provide input and they say, oh, well, our database is going to have limitations on how many flags we can have on particular attributes. So that might be a challenge, or that's going to cause extra work. You'd be like, okay, well, what do you suggest? Because, if you don't like what I'm doing, what's a better option? So they say, well, we could do this, right? So, and again, it's all about that early on failure, right? I have no problem failing early on and getting closer to success. So that's typically how I like to approach it. And so whether it's wireframes, sketches, anything like that, yeah. The biggest trouble that I get myself into is prototyping. I love to prototype. Being an interaction designer is really where I focus my specialties on. And when people see prototypes, it's like, oh, they just want more, give me more, give me more. And then the developer's looking at that instead of what your annotations and your wireframe is. And they're like, oh, I built it the way it looks. It's like, yeah, but that's just smoke and mirrors, buddy. That's, that's not the gospel. The gospel's here in the written word. So, you really got to set that expectation. And I always keep my prototypes in the cloud where I can pull the plug on them and change the link address and just cut the cord so people don't, abuse it.
That's a great approach. I love that. All right. Well, thank you very much, Roger. And then again, we'll have some time at the end, most likely, if anyone wants to circle back. And yes, we all clapping for Roger. Great. I like that everyone took the same. Stephen, you led the style on that. Okay. So David, you're up. We have a minute for a
All right.
transition.
Let me get this all set up real quick. Oh, then share my screen. All right, you should see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
All right, so I almost didn't do a PowerPoint, so I'm gonna apologize ahead of time for you'll figure it out. So I'm David Burke. I am a principal software engineer at Liberty Mutual. I work on a team who provides a user interface platform for our customers within the company who use our platform to create what we call artifacts, or rather services and other things that they need, whether it be databases or raw data files or Git repos. That is what our team does. This is the value that we provide. So I regularly find myself asking this question. Why are we here? And the why are we here question to me applies to all the roles that are involved. So we have our product owner. Their job is to manage the product, to decide what are the outcomes we're looking for and what are the ways we're going to measure those outcomes. Our designers are in charge of what is the experience going to be like in our product, how are our users going to interact with it, what are the touch points, and what is the accessibility like in the product. The Scrum Master is the wonderful individual who wrangles us all. And then there's the developers. So that's going to be myself and my team members, where what we do is we just write the code. But as we go through that, sorry, my cat. As we go through that, we have to keep reevaluating, like, why are we here as a team doing what we're doing, and are we working together effectively? So a little bit about where we came from, and this we is collective we of my team. So in a time long, long ago, which is 2 to 3 years ago, before quarantine, we were I joined this team, and they had already gone through a very large design effort with the design team to create the application that we're working on now. So I joined fresh after that had been done, and we were now working on feature enhancements and iterating on the application. Back then, the way that the design worked was, because our design team at Liberty is more of a singular group, like a group of competence, which is hence the name Center of UXellence. They're a center of excellence sort of group, and they are tasked to work with developer teams. So as we work together, we come up with they come up with design, we code to their design, and try to implement what the vision is for the actual user experience of the application. Now, what this led to occasionally, because of capacity or lack of capacity from the design teams, because they need to work with other teams too, not just our team, sometimes we would have to ask, like, hey, does this look good? And they'd respond with, yeah, no, it looks great, or no, redo it. And what that could kind of feel like at sometimes is like just tossing things over the wall at each other, trying to just get something that's the right thing out for our customers so they can use it. So again, why are we here? And this is probably the shortest way I could come up with to describe why we as a team, us developers and our designers, why we are here is to provide the best customer experience that we can, because we have a captive audience, which is both probably a blessing and a curse. Because if something's wrong and our customers don't like it, they're very sure to let us know, and in very loudly sometimes for some cases. Uh, and so what we're here to do is we're here to provide them the best experience that they can, so they're delighted to use our app, not just they use it because they have to, because there's no other choice, but because they want to. So what's our current mode of operation? So I mentioned how in the past, sometimes it would feel like we were tossing things over the wall at each other, trying to come up with what the right solution was. That has been brought up time and time again, whether it be from our perspective, from someone else looking in perspective, even possibly from design's perspective, we figured we needed to find a way to come at this and come together in a way that enables both of us to be successful. And some of the strategies we have implemented are things like we have these optional office hours is a good example. And this kind of speaks to what Roger was describing, I would say, where we take the time, both as developers and as designers, to come together to talk about upcoming work for those next pieces that we're going to be working on as developers and design's going to be working on as designers. So we can work together to understand what, like, they have a piece that they've designed and it has to function a certain way. Like there's two scrolling sections and there's also a header bar. So if I scroll to the left or I scroll to the right, does the header bar stay? Does the header bar move with the right one? Does it move with the left one? And those types of questions are ones that we can bring to those office hours and ask, like, how is this intended to be used? Because we can look at the wireframe and we can know that they scroll, but we don't know how it's supposed to scroll. Another thing we do is we have direct line of communication. I was checking before my meeting because I was curious. I don't think I've actually spent more than 48 hours over the past 3 weeks, I think it was, where I haven't talked to one of our designers in a direct message, besides excluding weekends. So I usually within a day, most of the time is less than a day for each of the time I direct message one of our designers saying, hey, does this look right? Or I have a question on how this works. And our designers having uh, that dedication to our team to be responsive when we have those questions is invaluable. I can't say enough how much I appreciate having our designers be there and being available to us when we have these questions as they come up, because it helps us deliver the software faster. It helps us deliver the software right. And it also helps us sometimes come up with a better solution, because sometimes something was designed, we think either there's a better way it can be done or why something's confusing because there was an assumption made and that assumption was just made early on and we clarified it, and then together we can come up with something better. And that's something that can really only be done in direct communication. And the last bullet point is one that's also been pretty beneficial, is integration into our ceremonies. So our designers, because they work on a team as designers and they each work on with separate development teams, they have their own ceremonies that they have to attend and report out at and talk at. And they also spend the time to come to ours. And when I say come to ours, there's actually two teams that they're coming to for ceremonies. So they're being spread pretty thin for only two designers that work with our two teams, because they have to go to their ceremonies and they have to come to our ceremonies. So they've worked out ways that help them, where they either come to only certain ones or they alternate who goes to which one, or if one of them needs to go for because they have context that the other designer might not, then they come to the ceremony where it makes sense. So it saves them time, but it also allows us to work with them in those ceremonies. So if we're planning, we can ask like, hey, what do you have for the design for this? Can you explain this to us? So we can either clarify the story or we can uh, write another story because we realize, oh no, we missed something and now we're getting it out there. So now we can better plan for the next sprint. Something else that they've been with us, even earlier today, I was on a meeting where we were doing an inception for a new effort that's coming up, and one of the person who was leading the meeting was actually a designer. Uh, and that's really cool too, because then as they're facilitating the meeting, we can have the design input uh, alongside our discussion of what are the goals for this inception, what are the risks, and what are the outcomes we want. Okay, but is that enough? The answer is no. So there's always something we can all be doing to improve. And sometimes some of the things we have done are things we have to drop because situations can change. So since we can always improve, the thing that's I find most valuable and has been most valuable to us has been shrinking the feedback loop. So this is, again, when we have designers involved in our ceremonies, and when we have the ability to just reach out at a moment's notice and they get back to us within usually less than 30 minutes. Uh, as we can shrink that feedback loop, we can move faster together, and we can also change how we are integrating with each other. We can adjust to say, I mean, we have been adjusting the office hours as another example. Just 3 weeks ago, office hours was a weekly thing, and then it turned out to be we didn't need the office hours as like a mandatory everyone comes to it anymore thing. It's more like a, hey, I actually have some questions, but just ping me when you're ready for me for my questions. And most importantly, just all of us staying flexible is the key piece. Being able to work with one another. And with that, I think my time is up. So any questions?
Talk about perfect timing. Excellent. Thank you very much. So yes, there was one question from Lou. Why are meetings called ceremonies? It's just a little too cult-like for my liking, but I guess Agile can be perceived as very cult-like in many ways. And I second this. As a career switcher to UX and tech in general, I'm confused. So
Yeah,
any
so
thoughts on that?
I will happily share why they're called ceremonies, or rather why we call them ceremonies. So I will agree with you that Agile is kind of cult-like in that it uses very specific terms to mean very specific things. And when we call a meeting a ceremony, it's because it is a very specific thing in Agile that we were meeting for. So one ceremony would be stand up. So it's like our daily meeting to chat, say, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm going, or I need help. Can someone help me? Or hey, I have capacity, but we have a work in progress limit, so I can help someone else. If you need help, just let me know and we'll pair. Then we have like grooming, which is we go through our backlog, look at the stories, either we point them or we revise them, we get them to where they can be ready to be worked on. And then planning is the one where we sort of like say, okay, for what are we doing for our next sprint? Because we just finished this sprint. And then there's retrospective as well, which is a look back at the previous sprint, like what went well, what didn't go well, what should we change. So those are what I would call ceremonies, whereas all of our other meetings are just meetings. So I would agree. It does sound and perceived very cult-like, but it's just because those are very specific meetings with specific purposes, and we have them either weekly or biweekly, or daily for stand-up.
All right, I'll take it. That is a good reasoning. Thank you. And from Anil, how do you use the information from the retrospectives?
So I love this question. This is a good question because that answer changes week to week. So some of our retrospectives, it depends on like what comes out of the retro. So if we have, say, a retro where we're like, hey, we had a rough time with design this week. Why did we have a rough time with design this week? We could ask like, well, were they busy? Like, were they in a bunch of meetings because they had like three full days of meetings because there's some special thing going on? Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Let's plan for that next time. Then we have other things like, okay, well, why did this software not, or why did the sprint work not get delivered for X, Y, or Z? And then we could say, well, let's do problem solving, like a root cause problem solving analysis. Let's figure out like what caused us to be in this situation. And recently we had one of those, and we found that what we thought was the root cause was we didn't do enough for the grooming work, and so we needed to refocus on our grooming. So just two examples of things that have happened in the past.
Very interesting. If we have any other questions, put them in there while I'm talking. It sounds like you've helped the teams build a sense of respect for each other's work, and that they, maybe since they get to interact more, they value each other's contributions more. I've seen lots of silos and separation, but this seems like a more respectful and like inquisitive
Yeah.
relationship almost.
So I would say that we're still going through growing pains.
Sure.
And but where we came from versus where we are now, I'd say yes, because I'll be the first to admit I was one of the ones who was complaining 2 years ago. And my complaints weren't that like, design's awful, because I love our designers. They're great. Absolutely great people. And they do great work. What I didn't like was I would get a change sent to me like, hey, can you actually move this from this menu onto a different screen and as a button instead. And I'm like, okay, yes, I can. I have to undo all the work I did and to go do new work now to make that happen. And that's where it kind of got to like, it feels like we're throwing stuff over the wall because I'm like, hey, does this look right? And they're like, actually, it'd be better over here. And I think to myself, you're right, it would be. That sucks. So like, we're definitely growing together between our teams and the designers, and it's a joint effort, and every day we're revisiting it, or not every day, but every other week, every week we're revisiting it, seeing like, is what we're doing, are the changes we've made working for us?
Yeah.
And a lot of the changes we've made for me have definitely been working, and for some of my team members, I know it's been working, but we just have to keep working towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got a nice thank you from Lou for your question about ceremonies. You should definitely check that out. And Kyle asks a question. She says, it might have been answered, but just in case, what is your biggest pet peeve with designers and or researchers that we can try to avoid?
So my biggest pet peeve would probably be not knowing where something came from. And when I say that, a good way to explain, and this is why the integration to our ceremonies is really helpful for me, because a recent example, we use Material UI for what we're working on right now. And in Material UI, they have a lot of code examples for like how to implement with like different examples, like how you can use MUI for different components. Sometimes the ones that are used for those mockups, they look just like they do in Material UI. When we see them as we get to the story and like planning, and then we don't know where those came from, like those mockups came from, then have to go during planning, go back to the Material UI docs, try and find it real quick so we can know how difficult is this component to work with. And like that's something that part of what we're doing, what we've taken back is myself and one of the other developers, we the day before our planning meeting start looking at stories now ahead of time, and we do some pre-work to make sure we understand for the more junior developers what's the work look like for using these components if there's new components. And so we're able to like get ahead of that. But because we didn't know back then where those were coming from, since the movie's still pretty new to us, there was a bit of growing pain there. And so like my pet peeve is like, okay, where did this even come from? But once I know where it comes from, it's no problem at all. Just gotta know.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you. And now we can clap for David. Thank you, David. And Andrea, we have a minute to transition. Thank you again, David, for your time. And thank you for everyone for your great questions. And there is a question for you, David, at the end that we can revisit. And we're gonna pause the recording for now.
Okay, hang on.
So let's see how this goes.
Great. And I'm going to drop some of the upcoming event links in the chat that I meant to get in there earlier. So feel free to scoop them up at the end of the meeting. And if you want to share your LinkedIn address or anything in the chat, please feel free to.
I have to restart to give Zoom permission to share my screen, so one moment.
We'll be here.
I hope so.
Let's see.
So some live user testing for Zoom.
Yeah. Roger, background upgrade. I like it.
That's great.
Just do something to kill some couple of minutes here.
Yeah, it works. So for disclosure, I've been job searching during the pandemic, so I haven't had as many Zoom meetings to see people's pets on their Zoom calls. So I get really excited whenever I get to see some. So Stephen, welcome back. Perfect.
David, that your cats made a cameo because they're, yeah.
You really wanted to be on my desk during my talk.
I know. Our cats will have to meet at some point, David, because they're assertive. All right, Stephen, thank you very much. And I'll be quiet now.
All
Have
right,
fun.
no problem. Everybody can see my screen all right?
Yes, perfectly.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time tonight. I know we're coming up at the end, so I'll make sure I'm not too long. Taking things back a bit, actually following in a bit of a theme from our first two talks, you know, how we're working with our partners in our development sides and our business side is so important. And I wanted to take it back and look at the business partnerships first. This is an area that we find within our organization, and I found before, is often one of the hardest places to build these bridges and build these partnerships and keep things moving forward. So, you know, if we can't show how we are supporting business as a user experience team, our projects don't get funded. You know, we need to make sure that we are able to justify the value of the work that we do beyond being good for humans. You know, as much as it's important for what we do in terms of ethical design, accessible design, and just plain old usability, we have to provide a bit of a dollar justification beyond what we do to continue to do these big projects that make real change, you know, across industries and across organizations. So I want to touch on, you know, why design matters at all in the current economy, how we can explain the importance of the collaboration between UX and business, and also some ways we can describe the business value we provide to an organization in ways that make our business partners quite excited. A very brief background on TMG. We have grown from a commerce-focused consultancy into a full suite consultant agency. We've expanded out most recently our UX department and digital transformation. We really believe in long-term partnerships and being very open and transparent with who we work with. Most of our very first foundational partners are still our partners to this day. So really work on those long-term and areas where we can create more lasting change versus just working on a single project at a time. Our UX pillar has grown from one UX lead and one UI lead 3 years ago into now a team of 19 strong as of this week. And we're also shifting our focus. We're really trying to grow into strategic UX services, moving beyond just completing these tactical requests and these initial projects that come in, and really trying to improve our ability to influence projects and promote usability and accessibility within these organizations. So when we think about how we're working within the economy, technology is driving everything, and it's been this way for quite a long time. If we look back to 1776, we had about 90+% of the country employed on a farm. This had dropped to half of the country by 1870, not even 100 years later. And now 100 years beyond that, it's down to under 2%. But this doesn't mean we have 2% of agricultural output. As we know, we're able to produce massive food surpluses, be able to support larger populations around the world, export our goods. And this is not just happening with farming, with agrarian products. Our technological advancement is really spurring the commoditization of all pieces of the economy. As technology improves, things get cheaper to make and more efficient and more accessible, be able to distribute wider and wider. We're starting to see competition in our economy just based around price. This happened, with goods in factories. Now we're just focused on the cheapest ability for what we can produce and purchase. And services too are not immune to this as well. We've seen this happen, especially with the growth of the internet. Think of services, Kayak was one of the earlier ones where you can just compete on just price, just cheapest airfare, cheapest hotels. Really the ability to get access to these is growing. And so now we're moving into the experience economy. This was detailed by some very smart economists in 1999. Every evolution of our economic growth and our economic focus as a country has turned the previous bits into a commodity. But until somebody is able to put a price value on human experience, this is where we live today. This is where we are providing unique offerings for our products and our services. And a very touching quote from one of the two authors of this book. That's the most important thing to understand. These experiences are distinct offerings, as distinct as a service is from a good. And it's when we're using our goods as props and services as a stage to engage every individual in a very personal way and create memories, which are the hallmarks for our experiences. So that's great, but it's also very fuzzy. So how do we bring this down a little bit into what we're actually bringing to the table? And we do this by thinking about, if our current economy is driven by experiences, we need to provide a unique experience. And if we're going to provide something unique, we need to innovate. So how do we innovate? We work together. We need to collaborate to innovate. So for a while, it was business as business, and they dictated what and how we made things. And through the industrial revolutions, you start to see engineering come to the table as well. How are we building things more efficiently? How do we know what we cannot build, even if it's a good idea for our business, what is possible technically? And particularly since the internet boom over the past few decades, design is now really being brought into this collaborative space. We're getting that seat at the table, and we're getting that opportunity to work alongside directly business and engineering. And all of these unique perspectives, all of these viewpoints, all of these angles come together and help us ensure that we're creating something new. We're creating something innovative. But what exactly are we doing besides bringing a different viewpoint? And more importantly, especially for the business, how do we ensure that this innovation is going to give us a competitive advantage and not just be something new for newness' sake? So we think about it, rather than a partnership between business, engineering, and design, we're now grouping things together in what exactly our lens is, what our frame is here. And it's a collaboration between viability, feasibility, and desirability. And if we replace all of our initial concepts as just what we work on and what we do, and we start to think about it as what our lens is and what our focus is to make sure that this innovation works, it's no longer just an innovation, and it's now an innovation that gives us a competitive advantage. It's something new that makes good business sense, that is able to be built and supported and maintained, and is desirable. And this is the missing piece for our experience economy. This is where we in the UX field bring our new edge and our new shape to it. And that is really the value of UX. We know that if we're going to have a competitive advantage in the marketplace, it has to be good for our business. It has to be able to be executed by our team, and it has to be something that will be adopted by our customers. Because when we innovate, we're providing a unique position. We're providing a new experience within our market compared to any of our competitors. But only market adoption validates that advantage. And that right there is the value of UX we sell to our business partners. We are measuring desirability within a market. And that is what separates just another new feature from something that is going to provide real lasting value for our users. But how do we do that? How does everything that we do and that we know that we work on and know that we value as a UX designer measure desirability? And we break it down into a couple lenses of what we can say. There's many different ways to think about this, but I found these 4 perspectives work very well, as we can agree that if something meets all of these criteria, it is desirable. And first, it has to be something that's credible. If it's going to be credible, it has to be impactful. If it's impactful, it has to be usable. And if it's usable, it has to be detectable. And all of these in this order will guarantee every time this is something that is desirable for our audience, for our market to use. Because we know that if something is going to be adopted, it comes from credibility, trust, accuracy, good intentions. This is something that you're going to use over and over. And you can trust it and it's accurate if you get repetitive positive impressions. This is what builds credibility over time. You only get those positive impressions by using something that you can use, a tool that gives you faster, more successful results every time you use it. You pick it up more frequently. And you're only going to get those faster, more successful results if you can self-guide through your tasks, if what you're using is in fact a usable system and a usable solution. And it's taking all of the work that we do together, taking all of the things that are less tangible and harder to put into these dollar value amounts and these justifications that are still so important to be able to bring this value to the table and reinforce why we are here and why it's worth listening to our perspectives and listening to what we think and what our opinion is, and helping shape business requirements as well as the actual development implementation. So quite a lot in just over 10 minutes, a bit high level here, but very important. Something that we've really found over and over is building those really strong partnerships, not only with business, not only with the development, but also with the business, gives us that really long lasting credibility and the opportunities to do some really cool things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. That was a great presentation. Let's see, there was some discussion that you picked good fonts in the chat to start. I'd love to hear, as everyone gets questions in, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this seems to bring a sense of like impact to design, like you were saying, like our work is important and it affects how people perceive the product and everything, and that credibility that you mentioned, that is the overarching, is so hard to build right now. Do you have any, the basic approach to how to introduce that focus? Or I'm not sure how to phrase it. How do you make something credible, really?
And that's very important. And we really believe, for all the work that we do, we're really trying to highlight accessibility in terms of everything we do. We promote ethical design with our clients as well. We're making sure that we're being good, honest, engaging partners, because particularly we're working with very large organizations that have global reach. And so it becomes ever more important to make sure we're not letting our business talk us into any dark patterns, things like that. But ultimately, credibility comes with time, and being able to just get that buy-in from our business partners to say, we're making these recommendations based on data, based on, good usability foundations and principles, and by listening to our users. Once we get that moving and get that in place, that gives us more of the longer term trajectory to keep working on these things and build up that credibility with our audience. So it's so hard to just come in and, everybody likes to hear like, yeah, we're going to do things ethically, we're going to do things the right way. But ultimately, a lot of times it comes down to funding, to what's available and what we can work with. And making sure we have that good, strong buy-in from our business partners gives us a lot more of that flexibility and breathing room to have the longer term exposure on a project to really build up that credibility ourselves through good, accessible, usable design.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love the focus on accessible and relationship building. I think those are so important in this field. Roger has a question. How big of a part does usability testing and research play in your organization?
A great question, and frankly, not as huge of a direct role as I would like. So because we are working in as a consultant agency with our partners, we don't always have that direct line of access to our partners' customers. We can occasionally get access, but oftentimes we are working with other teams that are managing, like web surveys, things like that, getting resources that we can bring in where we can. It's something we're always, trying to promote and push forward, building in that time to do research. Even if we can't do a direct usability study ourselves, which we don't often have the control to do as much as we'd like. We're making sure we're basing this off of research that we've done either for the industry, research other teams have done with their customers, trying to bring in oftentimes marketing teams and agency teams who have more of that direct line of feedback and have them help us ask some of these more usability focused questions versus some of the traditional market research questions. Mm-hmm. Also an area I'm actually looking to expand ourselves out this year with the real explosion, a lot of these digital services. I'm hoping to see our team be able to partner with a virtual research firm to conduct some direct usability studies that we might not have access to on our own.
Great. We have some real excellent researchers in this group, so make some connections here. Boyd has a question. Would you talk about the process of moving between these measures for UX? For example, does detectability influence credibility, and how are these negotiated? Is it linear, non-linear, or as usual, does it depend?
Always depends. No, so we see this almost as a funnel. You know, where we're working is not necessarily negotiating. Can we do this in a way that's impactful or credible? Because ultimately, you know, we know that if we are working purely on detectability, this is what's going to build out these additional layers over time. So when I have them there in that nested shell, all of the work we do is at that first level, at that first bullet point. And what we use is this is the funnel, this is the story that we can use with our business partners to reinforce why it's worth spending so much time to get this usability right in the first place. You know, making sure that we can get that extra time to do those additional design reviews, to go do some direct user feedback, to be able to have, you know, this better understanding of our acceptance criteria and our needs, and even have the opportunities to change some of the business requirements and what the business might want to do based on things we know are, you know, good user experiences. So trying to change, you know, requested data for forms, things like that. What can we do to just always build in a good, accessible, detectable solution, and know and trust that over time, this is what builds up the impact, the credibility, and the lasting use. And this comes back to us in terms of metrics that we can use to reinforce, hey, this is what was right in the first place. You know, this is where we can see, look at this uptick in longer term usage and say that is a credible application, that is an impactful application. But sometimes this is just about getting our foot in the door to get that little bit of extra time or get a little bit of extra budget, things like that, and help our business partners have faith in what we're doing, and beyond just having faith, you know, having them have more of a business understanding of why we're doing what we're doing.
Great. That's a good use of it depends, because you backed it up with the context and why it does depend. All right, thank you
Isn't
very
that what
much.
we always do?
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. Any last questions for Stephen before we open things up a little bit? Let's see. All right, thank you, Stephen. Excellent job on your first Zoom sharing presentation. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to dig into this some more. And let's see, Roger had a question for David. I'm just finding it again. I think it was a question for David. Has your design team ever created a custom widget library that mimics the framework?
So I'm going to say yes and no. And
That's basically it depends.
it basically is. So so there's a bit more context here, because so the root of the question of, is there a library, like a shareable widget library, is kind of how I see the root of this question. So there was originally one for the old version of the app, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So this happened before I was on the team for its original inception, but I believe Christine was one of the designers that worked with them to create that. And that one ended up not being compatible with Material UI, which is what we're moving to. So we're actually in the process of building out a new one, but we're basing it on, there's also a corporate wide version used by one of our markets. And that market team has created one. I think they used a mix of contractors and designers to do the initial build out, and they're just upgrading and enhancing it from there. And so that's kind of it's very specific to them, but it's being adopted more widely throughout the company. So we're trying to imitate that as we build out our own. And the reason why we're building out our own is because there's constraints with how the widget library that exists over there is coded that doesn't really work for our use case as well. Also because we're internal versus that's also for external facing apps. So we have a bit more flexibility because we're internal facing, but we still want to look like we're part of the same company. So we're sort of mirroring that, and it was also based on MUI. So it's making it an easier time on the design team for working with borrowing where they can, but using MUI where they can't. And when they use movie where they can't, sometimes that involves us creating a new component that we work with them to make sure like, hey, is this working the way that you think it should be working? And what are the pieces of this that we can sort of break apart? Like, is this part reusable? Is that part reusable? Is the whole thing collectively reusable? And then once we get that figured out and worked out with design, then we just kind of go from there, and it makes our future stories faster.
Yeah, it seems that if you're, using the Material UI framework, that, if you're going to stick with that, then it's worth creating a Material UI widget library that has your
Yep.
branding and everything with it. So you have just this core library that has all of the core behavior, native behavior defined. So the annotations are less, the interactions are already established, and the constraints are factored in, and
Yep.
it's kind of drag and drop into your tool and go,
Yep. And a great way to speak to that is probably tables. It's the easiest one. That's a big pain point in Material. I find them very painful to work with, but we've created a table that's been reused probably 4 different spots in our app already because we use Material UI, and we did exactly that. We sort of styled it and gave it the constraints we're going to work within throughout all of our apps for it. And that's how we're using the table going forward.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no
Great,
problem.
thank you. In our last 1 minute, if anyone wants to squeeze in, if you're hiring for positions or if you're seeking for a position, I meant to do this earlier, so I'm sorry I didn't get it in there, but thank you again all for your time, and we'll open up for any last minute quick questions or mentions. Oh, Boyd, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Boyd, and I'm transitioning from academia to UX research. And I'm in the job market. So if you're looking for a UX researcher at a junior level, which I know is sort of a infrequent thing, I'm around. Thanks.
Great. And Boyd dropped his LinkedIn in the chat, so if anyone wants to follow up with him, please do. Let's see. There's also Derry Allen looking for UX writer position. So there's some really great people in this group, and please do follow up on LinkedIn to find them. All right. Last call for anything else? All right, everyone looks happy. It's a sign of a good Zoom meeting. We survived with more than 50% of attendees that we started with. Good job, speakers. Thank you again from the board members to all of you for showing up and spending your time with us tonight. Thank you, of course, to our speakers. You were all fantastic.
Good work, everyone.
You all
That was
on
really
LinkedIn.
great. Wonderful.
Thank you
Impressed
so
that
much.
everyone stayed within the time. Very impressed.
Yeah.
Yes, I was blown away.
Wicked hard.
And please do join us on Slack. We have some good conversations going over there. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, we're everywhere. So looking forward to getting to know you all more, and see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.